under Venice's harvest moon, where canals whisper ancient curses, a scream shatters the night at Palazzo Venier. British antiquities dealer Reginald Hargrove floats dead in the Rio dei Orefici, throat slashed by a cursed Renaissance dagger, clutching a torn fragment of rare Venetian lace. Was it robbery or revenge? Enter Miss Jane Marple, the unassuming spinster from St. Aldhelms, whose village wisdom unravels a web of smuggling, forgeries, and hidden vaults. As suspects, a flamboyant American heiress, her shady secretary lover, a desperate count, and a grieving niece spin alibis in the fog-shrouded labyrinth. Marple spots the dropped threads. A monogrammed button, a forged note, a locked door's trick. Greed strikes from a silent gondola, but truth's blade cuts deeper. Who wielded the dagger? Dive into murder at the Moonlit Canals. Agatha Christie's Miss Marple faces Venice's deadly masks. Chapter 1. Arrival in Venice. The Vaporetto chugged steadily along the Grand Canal, its wake rippling against the weathered palazzi that lined the waterway like silent sentinels. Miss Jane Marple sat primly on a wooden bench near the prow, her hands folded over a small tapestry bag containing her knitting needles and a skein of fine wool. The air was warm and heavy with the scent of salt and stagnant water, a far cry from the crisp breezes of her native Dorset. She had never been one for foreign travel. Venice, with its labyrinth of canals and throngs of chattering tourists, seemed a world apart from the orderly lanes of St. Aldhelms. But Sir Henry Clithering's invitation had been insistent. "My dear Miss Marple," he had written from his club in London, "you possess an insight into the frailties of human nature that no amount of official training can impart. This literary conference at the Palazzo Venier promises to be a gathering of scholars debating Venetian enigmas of old. Perfect fodder for your village wisdom. Do come, the air will do you good." And so, here she was, her sensible black brogues planted firmly on the deck, watching as the Rialto Bridge arched overhead, its arches festooned with market stalls. Sir Henry, tall and distinguished in his tweed suit despite the heat, stood beside her, pointing out landmarks with the enthusiasm of a seasoned traveller. "See there, the Cadoro, Gold House they call it, and beyond the Accademia. But the Palazzo Venier is our destination, a gem of the Renaissance, owned by Count Alessandro di Rossi. His family has held it for centuries." Miss Marple nodded politely, her bird-like eyes taking in the scene. Gondolas slipped past like black shadows, their polesmen calling out in rhythmic Italian. Ladies in silk dresses and gentlemen in linen suits disembarked at private jetties, while vendors hawked glass beads and masks from the city's endless carnival tradition. "So many people," she murmured, "all hurrying about their secrets. It reminds me of market day in St. Aldhelms, when the poacher's wife pretends not to notice her husband's empty pockets." Sir Henry chuckled. "Venice is a city of masks, literal and otherwise. You'll fit right in with your quiet observations." The Vaporetto drew up to a moss-covered landing stage before the Palazzo Venier, its facade of faded pink marble rising sheer from the water. Liveried servants assisted the passengers ashore, and Miss Marple was ushered through a wrought-iron gate into a courtyard fragrant with jasmine. A footman led her up a grand staircase to her room. On the piano nobile, a chamber with frescoed walls and a balcony overlooking the canal. She unpacked methodically, her lace shawl, a few volumes of poetry, and her knitting. From the balcony, she watched the sunset gild the water, turning the city into a tapestry of gold and shadow. Dinner that evening was served in the Palazzo's Salone, a vast room aglow with chandeliers of Murano glass. The conference guests mingled, scholars in spectacles, a sprinkling of antiquaries, and a few luminaries of society. Prominent among them was Mrs. Lavinia Grant, the American heiress whose diamonds rivaled the canal's reflections. She swept in on the arm of her secretary, Mr. Elias Thorne, a lean man with a predatory gaze and a Chicago accent sharpened by European polish. "Darlings," she trilled, her voice carrying over the clink of crystal, "Venice at harvest moon is divine, but mind the ghosts. They say the canals whisper of old murders." Nearby hovered Count Alessandro di Rossi, the host, a dark-haired aristocrat with an aquiline nose and a courteous smile that did not quite reach his eyes. He greeted Sir Henry warmly, then turned to Miss Marple. "The English spinster, see? Sir Henry speaks highly of your intuitions. We are honoured." Miss Marple inclined her head. "Thank you, Count. I'm but a simple visitor, fond of a quiet evening with my needles." Conversation turned to the Palazzo's treasures, particularly a Renaissance dagger in the private collection, a ceremonial piece of damascened steel, its hilt encrusted with emeralds, rumoured to carry a curse from the days of the Doges. "Family legend," the Count said lightly, "but artifacts like that draw all sorts. Our antiquities dealer, Mr. Reginald Hargrove, arrives tomorrow to discuss its provenance." As the moon rose, full and luminous, casting silvery pathways across the water, the guests retired. Miss Marple lingered on her balcony, the night's hush broken only by the lap of tides and distant laughter. She thought of St. Aldhelm's churchyard, where moonlight revealed secrets in the gravestones. Venice, she sensed, held its own buried truths. Then, from the narrow canal at the Palazzo's rear, the Rio dei Orefici, a scream rent the air, sharp and terrified, echoing off the ancient walls. Lights flickered on in windows, voices called in alarm. Miss Marple peered into the gloom, her heart steady. "Dear me," she whispered to the night, "it seems the conference has begun in earnest." Chapter 2. Discovery. The scream lingered in the night air like a discordant note from a cracked violin, shattering the fragile peace of the Palazzo Venice. Miss Marple, still poised on her balcony with her shawl drawn tight against the sudden chill, leaned forward, her sharp eyes piercing the moonlit gloom. Below, in the narrow confines of the Rio dei Orefici, a lesser canal branching off the Grand Canal like a secretive vein, the water gleamed with an unnatural sheen. Figures emerged from the palazzo's rear portals, servants with lanterns, guests in dishabille, their faces pale masks of confusion and fear. Among them, Sir Henry Clithering appeared, his dressing gown hastily tied, calling out for calm. "Miss Marple!" he exclaimed, spotting her silhouette. "Did you see anything? That cry came from the canal. Terrible business." She descended the marble staircase with dignified haste, her brogues echoing softly on the stone. "I saw shadows, Sir Henry, nothing more, but screams in the night are rarely without cause. Let us see what the water has yielded." By the time they reached the canal's edge, where a small stone bridge arched over the murky flow, a crowd had gathered. Gondoliers from nearby moorings poled closer, their craft bobbing gently, while a liveried footman held aloft a lantern that cast wavering beams across the scene. There, floating face down amid the refuse of the tide, apple cores, discarded newspapers and the occasional fish scale, lay the body of a man. His evening clothes were sodden, a dark stain blooming across his white shirt front at the throat. One arm trailed limply in the water, and in his rigid fist something white fluttered like a drowned moth. "Reginald Hargrove!" gasped a voice from the throng. It was young Miss Clara Beaumont, Hargrove's niece, who had arrived that afternoon with her uncle. She clutched a maid's arm, her pretty face contorted in horror. "Uncle Reggie! Oh God, no!" Inspector Giovanni Rossi of the Venetian Questura arrived within minutes, his motor launch slicing through the canal with the wail of a siren. A burly man in his 50s, with a luxuriant moustache that twitched like a living thing and eyes sharp as a stiletto, he barked orders in rapid Italian. Uniformed officers cordoned off the area, stretching ropes across the bridge and herding the Gawkers back toward the palazzo. "Fuori! Out of the way!" he commanded, his English accented but precise. "This is a crime scene, not a carnivale spectacle." The body was fished out with hooked poles, laid upon the damp paving stones under the lantern's glare. Hargrove, a portly Englishman in his late 50s, with a ruddy complexion now turned waxen, had been dead no more than an hour. The medical examiner would later confirm. His throat bore a single, precise slash, deep and clean, as if delivered by a razor-edged blade wielded with surgical intent. No sign of struggle marred his person. His wallet was missing from his inner pocket, suggesting robbery, yet his gold watch remained strapped to his wrist. Its face stopped at 11:45. And then there was the object in his hand, a fragment of antique lace, intricate and delicate. Venetian point lace of the 17th century, its edges frayed as if torn in violence. "A robbery gone wrong," Inspector Rossi declared to the assembled group, wiping his brow with a handkerchief. "The canals are full of footpads and desperate men. This Hargrove fellow, antiquities dealer, eh? Probably flashed his wares too openly." He knelt to examine the lace, holding it to the light. Curious souvenir. Perhaps from a lady's favour, or a thief's mask. We'll have it analysed. Miss Marple, standing slightly apart with Sir Henry, observed the proceedings with the quiet intensity of one who had seen village tragedies unfold in churchyards and hedgerows. She noted the positioning of the body, drifted downstream a mere dozen yards from the palazzo's watergate, and the absence of blood trails on the stones implying the fatal blow had been struck in the canal itself or very near its edge. "Human nature being what it is," she murmured to Sir Henry, "robbers don't often leave calling cards like that lace. It reminds me of old Mrs. Hargreaves back in St. Aldhelm's, who clung to her brooch even as the life ebbed from her. Proof of something more personal than mere theft." Sir Henry nodded, his Scotland Yard instincts reawakened. "Hargrove wasn't due until tomorrow, but he arrived early this evening, slipped in quietly, attended a pre-conference aperitif in the salon, then vanished. I spoke with him briefly, keen on acquiring that Renaissance dagger from the Count's collection." The inspector, overhearing, turned with a grunt. "Sir Henry Clithering, the famous detective. And you, Signora?" His gaze settled on Miss Marple, who met it with mild politeness. "Miss Jane Marple, sir, a guest of Sir Henry's. I fear I can offer little but tea and sympathy." Rossi snorted. "English amateurs. This is Venice, not your misty moors. But proceed. Tell me what you know." Interviews began impromptu by the canal, lanterns flickering like will-o'-the-wisps. First was Mrs. Lavinia Grant, the American heiress, swathed in a silk kimono that did little to hide her ample figure. She had retired early, she claimed, but heard a splashing sound around midnight, perhaps a gondola, or the victim's final struggle. "I saw nothing, Inspector Darling," she drawled, fanning herself with a lace-trimmed fan. "But that lace, it looks familiar. Venetian work, no? I have a gown with similar trimming." Her secretary, Mr. Elias Thorne, hovered protectively, his sharp features taut. A Chicago man turned art dealer. He confirmed Mrs. Grant's account, stating he had been in his room reviewing auction catalogues. Count Alessandro de Rossi, the host, arrived in a velvet dressing gown, his aristocratic poise unbroken. "A tragedy for my house," he said smoothly, his English flawless. "Hargrove was here to discuss this dagger, family heirloom, you understand." I showed him the collection briefly after dinner. Then he said he needed air. The canals can be treacherous at night. He seemed overly eager to cooperate, suggesting the palazzo's water gate might have been forced, though a cursory check revealed no damage. "Robbers from the lagoon, perhaps. Venice has changed since the Doges." Young Clara Beaumont, barely 20, was a picture of distraught innocence, her fair hair dishevelled, eyes red from tears. "Uncle had no enemies. He was kind, generous, came to Venice for the conference, nothing more. We shared a late supper in his room. Then he went for a walk. I heard the scream and ran down." She insisted Hargrove carried no valuables beyond his wallet, and swore he had mentioned no threats. Yet Miss Marple, watching the girl's trembling hands, detected a flicker of something unspoken, perhaps the burden of family secrets, akin to the vicar's daughter who hid her father's gambling debts. As the body was covered with a tarpaulin and removed to the launch, Rossi's men combed the canal's edges, their boots splashing in shallows. No murder weapon surfaced. The blade had likely been whisked away by the current or a cunning hand. The inspector turned to Sir Henry. "Your insight, signore? This lace, it's no common trash. Experts at the museum will date it, but it points to someone connected, not a random cutthroat." Sir Henry glanced at Miss Marple, who was absently fingering her own shawl's edging. "Miss Marple has a knack for such details. The lace matches the cuff of Mrs. Grant's gown. I noticed earlier at dinner." Miss Marple said nothing aloud, but her mind raced. In St. Aldhelm's, a similar scrap of fabric had unravelled a tale of jealousy and theft during the flower show. Here, amid Venice's opulent decay, the fragment whispered of deeper intrigues, the dagger's curse perhaps, or rivalries over ancient treasures. As fog began to curl from the lagoon, muffling the city's eternal hum, she resolved to observe quietly. The inspector might chase shadows, but it was the dropped threads of human folly that would stitch the truth. By dawn's first light, the palazzo buzzed with whispers, the conference overshadowed by murder. Miss Marple retired to her room, knitting in hand, pondering the night's revelations. Venice's masks concealed much, but lace, like village gossip, betrayed the wearer in the end. Chapter 3. The Suspicions Stir. The morning sun filtered through the palazzo's arched windows, casting elongated shadows across the salon where the conference was to have convened. Instead, the room had been requisitioned by Inspector Giovanni Rossi for formal interviews. Its Murano chandeliers dimmed to a sombre glow, the air thick with the aroma of strong espresso and unspoken dread. Chairs were arranged in a semicircle around a scarred oak table, upon which lay the lace fragment under glass. its intricate patterns mocking the gravity of the occasion. Uniformed officers stood sentinel at the doors, while a stenographer scribbled furiously in a notebook. Miss Marple entered quietly, accompanied by Sir Henry Clithering, who had prevailed upon the inspector to allow her presence as an observer of character. Rossi, nursing a cigarette and a headache from the night's exertions, waved them to seats at the periphery. "Va bene, Sir Henry. Your English lady may watch, but no interference. This is police work, not a village tea party." His moustache quivered as he surveyed the suspects, summoned one by one from their rooms. First came Mr. Elias Thorne, Mrs. Grant's secretary and Hargrove's rival in the shadowy world of antiquities. A wiry man in his 40s, with slicked-back hair and a suit that hung loosely on his frame, he lit a cigarette of his own and exhaled a plume toward the ceiling frescoes. "Ask away, Inspector," he said coolly, his American twang laced with defiance. "Reggie and I crossed swords earlier, over a disputed Etruscan vase at last month's Geneva auction. He accused me of forgery. I called him a smuggler. Voices were raised in the Palazzo's loggia after the aperitif, around 10 o'clock, but I left him there, alive and cursing." Rossi leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "And your alibi, Signore Thorne? Where did you go after this discussion?" "Dined alone at Trattoria El Gatto Nero, just off the canal. Pasta alla puttanesca and a bottle of Chianti, back by 11:30. Thorne's gaze flicked to the lace. "That scrap. No idea. Reggie was flashy with his cufflinks, not lace." The inspector dispatched a subordinate to verify the alibi, but whispers among the officers suggested the trattoria's owner recalled no such patron that night. The place had been crowded with locals, not solitary foreigners. Miss Marple, knitting a simple stockinette stitch, noted Thorne's restless fingers drumming the armrest, reminiscent of the village solicitor who fidgeted during the inquest into the blacksmith's suspicious fall. Arguments over treasures, she thought, often mask deeper greeds, like the squabble over Grandfather Price's silver that led to that unfortunate poisoning. Next entered Count Alessandro de Rossi, impeccable in a tailored morning coat, though shadows under his eyes betrayed a sleepless night. He bowed slightly to the assembly before taking his seat. Hargrove's interest in the dagger was legitimate, he stated evenly. A ceremonial piece from the 16th century, forged for a doge's bodyguard. Damascened blade, emerald hilt. Family legend claims it drew blood in a conspiracy against the Republic. He proposed purchase for his London gallery, €500,000. I showed him the display case in my study post-dinner. He examined it closely, noted its balance. Then he excused himself for a stroll. Rossi pounced. "The dagger still in its case?" The Count hesitated fractionally. "See, Inspector, untouched, but Hargrove mentioned rivals, Thorne, perhaps, or others sniffing, about cursed relics for their thrill." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. The Count's eagerness to disclose felt rehearsed, like the squire's overzealous alibi in the St. Aldhelm's poacher case. Curses, she mused, were but veils for mortal motives, debts, jealousies, the eternal dance of human frailty. Mrs. Lavinia Grant swept in next, a vision in emerald silk that echoed the dagger's stones, her diamonds flashing defiantly. She settled with a rustle, dabbing perfume at her wrists. "Such a ghastly affair, Inspector. I retired at 10, as Elias can attest. Heard splashing near midnight. Gondolas, I thought, or lovers' trysts. That lace? My gown from dinner had point lace cuffs, true, but mine's intact. She extended a gloved arm for inspection, the fabric pristine. Thorne, lingering in the doorway, nodded confirmation, but Rossi's gaze sharpened. Your partnership with the deceased, Signora. Auction records show joint ventures. Business, darling, she trilled. Reggie sourced. I funded. No bad blood. Yet her fan's flutter betrayed nerves, akin to the dressmaker's tremor when questioned about stolen silks back home. Young Clara Beaumont followed, pale and composed, twisting a handkerchief. Uncle arrived early to surprise me. We're close, you see. Supper in his room. Prosciutto, figs, talk of home. He stepped out for air. I read in bed. The scream woke me. She professed ignorance of enemies, but a maid later confided Clara's tears over letters from England, hinting at blackmail, debts Hargrove had shouldered for her late mother's indiscretions. As interviews paused for coffee, Rossi conferred with Sir Henry. Alibis thin as canal mist. No weapon, but the wound suggests a slender blade. Like that dagger. The lace ties to the palazzo's guests, not street thieves. Sir Henry relayed Miss Marple's earlier observation. The fragment matches Mrs. Grant's gown cuff precisely. Torn, not cut. The inspector grunted. Forensic tests will confirm. But why leave it? A taunt? Miss Marple interjected mildly. Perhaps oversight in panic, Inspector. Or misdirection, like the poacher who dropped his own scarf to blame the gamekeeper. Midday brought a gondolier's testimony, summoned from the Rio's moorings. Old Matteo, weathered as driftwood, poled up in his craft, hat in hand. Midnight, signore. A figure on the bridge, cloaked in a dark cape, common enough for masquerade folk or thieves. Heard a splash, then silence, thought it drunkards till the scream. Capes abounded in Venice, yet the detail prickled. The Count owned several. Thorne had been seen in one. Even Mrs. Grant favoured dramatic raps. Fog from the lagoon now shrouded the canals, turning the city into a watercolour blur, muffling church bells and footsteps alike. By afternoon, the salon emptied, suspects dispersing under watch. Miss Marple and Sir Henry strolled the palazzo's gardens, clipped box hedges framing lagoon views. It's the inconsistencies, Sir Henry, she said, resuming her knitting. Thorne's dinner unverified, the Count's dagger untouched yet central, Clara's hidden letters. Like a dropped stitch in the village quilt, pull one thread, and the pattern unravels. Sir Henry smiled. Venice's alleys twist like St. Aldhelm's gossip paths, but with your eye, we'll navigate. As dusk fell, Rossi's men dredged the canal anew, yielding nothing but silt. Whispers of the dagger's curse spread. Had Hargrove awakened old vendettas? Miss Marple, peering from her balcony, saw cloaked figures flit by. The moon's silver paths now ominous. Human nature, she reflected, thrived on suspicion, and Venice's waters ran deep with it. Chapter 4. The Hidden Alliances. The afternoon waned into a golden haze over the lagoon, but the Palazzo Venier's atmosphere grew ever more claustrophobic, as if the very walls, adorned with faded tintorettos and brooding portraits of stern doges, pressed in upon the suspects like inquisitors of old. Inspector Giovanni Rossi, his patience fraying like cheap linen, retreated to the palazzo's archive room to sift through Hargrove's papers, seized from his guest chamber. What emerged painted a portrait far grimmer than mere robbery. Reginald Hargrove, the respectable antiquities dealer from Bond Street, had been neck-deep in smuggling. Crates of pilfered Byzantine ivories and Renaissance miniatures, funneled from Italian digs to black market buyers, funded his ruinous gambling at Monte Carlo and Biarritz. Manifests hidden in a false-bottomed valise bore coded entries linking him to overseas consignments and, crucially, to Mrs. Lavinia Grant. "Smugglers," Rossi muttered to his deputy, a young sergeant named Luca Moretti, as they pored over the documents by lamplight. "This explains the wallet's absence, a staged theft to mask deeper sins. But who wielded the blade?" The lace fragment, submitted to the city's forensic experts, confirmed its origin: Venetian point lace, handmade by a now-deceased artisan named Signora Elisa Vortici, whose workshop had supplied nobility in the 1920s. Only a handful of surviving pieces existed, including trimmings on gowns owned by elite collectors. Mrs. Grant's, it seemed, was among them. Word spread swiftly through the palazzo's corridors, igniting fresh suspicions. Miss Marple, taking a gentle promenade along the Zattere Promenade, a wide quay bordering the Giudecca Canal, where laundry fluttered from lines like surrendered flags, observed the group's fractured dynamics from afar. Gondolas plied the water, their singers crooning melancholic barcarolles, but the beauty masked tension. Mr. Elias Thorne shadowed Mrs. Grant at every turn, his arm brushing hers in a manner too proprietary for mere secretary and employer. The Count de Rossi, meanwhile, shunned the canals entirely, confining himself to the palazzo's inner courtyards, where fountains tinkled mockingly. Young Clara Beaumont wandered alone, her grief laced with furtive glances toward the Watergate. Fortuitous encounter enriched Miss Marple's inquiries. Pausing at a stall where an elderly lace-maker, Nonna Bianca, displayed fragile bobbin work, she inquired about the fragment's rarity. The old woman's eyes widened behind her spectacles. "Ah, Signora, that is Vortici's hand, unique, like fingerprints. She wove for the de Rossi family once, before the war scattered her patterns. Only 3 gowns survive with such cuffs, one in the Carrère Museum, one lost at sea, and—" She trailed off, crossing herself. "The third, they say, adorns a certain American lady who visits Venice yearly. But lace holds grudges, it clings to secrets." Miss Marple thanked her with a polite nod, slipping a few euros into the gnarled palm. Like the village embroiderer who knew every thread's tale, she reflected, secrets stitched themselves into the fabric. The lace was no random trophy. It bound victim to perpetrator in a web of high society vice. Back at the palazzo, Rossi's investigation deepened. A search of Hargrove's room yielded more than papers. A sheaf of coded notes, scribbled in haste, referencing the dagger's secret compartment. The Renaissance blade, still secured in its velvet-lined case within the Count's study, was examined under magnification. A subtle seam along the hilt, invisible to the untrained eye, suggested a hollow core, perhaps concealing a map, a gem, or a cipher from the Doge's era. Hargrove knew, the inspector theorized aloud to Sir Henry, who had joined the scrutiny. He pressed the Count for details, perhaps threatened exposure unless sold cheaply. Clara Beaumont, summoned again, cracked under the pressure of Rossi's relentless questioning in the salon. Seated on a brocaded settee, she dabbed at fresh tears with a monogrammed handkerchief. "Uncle had vices, yes, cards, horses, women, but he shielded me from it all. Mother's death left debts. He paid them quietly. I knew of the smuggling whispers, but loved him still. Those letters, from creditors, nothing more." Her voice wavered, however, when pressed on a locked drawer in his desk, now pried open to reveal pawn tickets for family jewels. Guilt Miss Marple surmised from her balcony vantage. Clara's devotion masked complicity, much like the curate's sister who concealed her brother's embezzlements in St. Aldhelm's. As twilight deepened, a new enigma emerged, the locked room conundrum of the palazzo's side door, a heavy portal of iron-bound oak giving direct access to the Rio de Orefici. Bolted from within at 10 o'clock, per the footman's routine, it remained so when the scream echoed at midnight. Yet the murderer had evidently exited to the canal, for footprints in the mud, discovered at low tide, led from the threshold into the shallows. No key was missing from the Count's ring. The bolt showed no tampering. "A confederate," Rossi growled, pacing the threshold. "Or some trick with string and pulley, like your English conjurers." Alibis crumbled further under scrutiny. Thorne's Trattoria tale was debunked. The owner swore no lone American dined that night, though a couple matching Mrs. Grant's description had shared a secluded table, whispering heatedly. Confronted, Thorne blustered, claiming a walk to clear his head, but a gondolier recalled ferrying a nervous foreigner across the canal around 11. Mrs. Grant, feigning vapours, retired to her suite, where her maid found her gown's cuff suspiciously repaired with fresh stitching. Dinner that evening, served amid strained silence in the palazzo's dining hall, crackled with veiled barbs. Crystal goblets clinked like accusations. The menu, risotto nero and grilled lagoon fish, tasted of ash. The Count proposed toasting absent friends, but Rossi's presence at the head quelled levity. Whispers circled the dagger. Had Hargrove pried open its secret, uncovering evidence of the de Rossi family's own smuggling lineage during the war? Clara, picking at her food, avoided Thorne's gaze, while he and Mrs. Grant exchanged loaded glances. Miss Marple, seated quietly with Sir Henry, sipped her Orvieto and knit a cable pattern, her mind mapping alliances. Thorne and Grant formed a cabal, bound by illicit profits. The Count guarded his heritage jealously. Clara navigated filial loyalty amid betrayal. The locked door mirrored the St. Aldhelm's Mill mystery, where a hidden latch fooled the constabulary. As servants cleared plates, fog thickened outside, swallowing the moon's glow. Venice's canals, she knew, hid more than bodies. They concealed pacts forged in greed, waiting to surface like bubbles from the depths. By night's end, Rossi posted guards at exits, the palazzo a gilded prison. Miss Marple retired, her tapestry bag heavier with observations. Human alliances, fragile as point lace, would fray under truth's blade. Chapter 5. Midnight Revelations. The full moon hung low over Venice like a burnished medallion, its light splintering into myriad shards on the lagoon's restless surface, turning the canals into veins of molten silver. Within the Palazzo Venier, the dinner had concluded in a pall of unease, the guests rising from the mahogany table as if from a séance gone awry. Inspector Giovanni Rossi, his face etched with fatigue yet alight with grim purpose, cleared his throat amid the scrape of chairs. The salon, with its vaulted ceiling echoing every whisper, served as impromptu tribunal once more. "A moment, signori e signore," he announced, his voice cutting through the clatter of departing servants. "New light on this affair. Listen well." He held aloft a velvet cloth, unveiling the Renaissance dagger from its case in the Count's study. The blade, slender and wickedly curved, gleamed under the chandeliers, its damascened patterns swirling like smoke. "Missing since yesterday's inspection," Rossi declared. "The lock forced subtly, No alarm raised till now. The wound on Hargrove matches this edge precisely. Single thrust, no hesitation. Who took it, and why? Return it, wiped clean to a hidden drawer? Panic rippled through the assembly. Mrs. Lavinia Grant, midway to the door, swayed dramatically and collapsed onto a divan, her fan fluttering to the floor. "The curse!" she gasped as attendants revived her with sal volatile. "That blade's bewitched. Blood calls to blood. I warned Reggie against it." Reviving with theatrical vigour, she pointed a trembling finger at Count Alessandro de Rossi. "You staged this, Count, for insurance. Your palazzo crumbles under debts. Hargrove refused your price. You silenced him and faked a theft." The Count's olive complexion paled, but he drew himself up, fists clenched at his sides. "Lies, Signora. The de Rossi honour forbids such base acts. Hargrove inspected the dagger at my invitation, admired its balance, probed the hilt seam for the legend's secret. I showed him out. The case was locked. If stolen, blame your own circle of vultures." His eyes flicked to Thorne, who shifted uncomfortably. Young Clara Beaumont, seated apart with hands clasped in her lap, produced a crumpled letter from her reticule, its paper water-stained. "Uncle wrote this from London, implicating Thorne in a forgery ring. E.T. peddles fakes as genuine. Grant launders the proceeds. If I expose them, watch my back." He meant to confront them here, use the dagger's provenance as leverage. Her voice broke, revealing the toll of divided loyalties. The letter, dated a fortnight prior, bore Hargrove's spidery script, detailing a scam where Thorne passed off modern replicas as Renaissance treasures, with Mrs. Grant's auctions providing cover. Thorne sneered, lighting a cigarette with studied nonchalance. "Slander from a desperate gambler. Hargrove owed me, lost a bundle on my fakes, as he called them. But murder? Absurd." Yet sweat beaded his brow, and Rossi noted the tremor in his hand. The Count, defensive under the barrage, admitted a family feud shadowing the proceedings. "Developers circle this palazzo. Venice drowns in tourism, they say. Sell or perish. Hargrove offered alliance, buy the dagger, fund restoration, expose rivals smuggling to sway authorities. I tipped him anonymously about Grant and Thorne, hoping he'd rout them. But I swear, no blade from my hand." Miss Marple, positioned near the French windows with Sir Henry, knitted steadily through the tumult, her needles weaving a fair aisle pattern that mirrored the evening's tangled revelations. The suspect's barbs echoed the St. Aldhelm's harvest supper, where accusations flew over tainted cider, unveiling a poisoner's grudge. Motives crystallized, greed for the dagger's rumoured compartment, perhaps a Doge's cipher or contraband jewel, fueled by blackmail and rivalry. Venice's labyrinthine alleys, she pondered, twisted truths like village lanes hid illicit stills. Slipping away as Rossi harangued the group, Miss Marple descended to the canal's edge, the night's chill nipping at her shawl. Lanterns bobbed from police launches, illuminating the Rio de Orefice's murk. She examined the paving stones anew, her keen gaze catching what forensics had overlooked. A single button, pearl-inlaid and monogrammed E.T., lodged in a crevice near the watergate. Elias Thorne's, undoubtedly, snagged during flight or struggle. But the lace? Its deliberate placement in Hargrove's grasp suggested theatre, a nod to historical crimes in the de Rossi annals, where a similar fragment marked a traitor's end. A telegram from her historian acquaintance in Oxford, delivered by footman, confirmed suspicions. The lace tied to a 17th-century scandal, a De Rossi ancestor's mistress, slain with a jewelled blade, her cuff torn in the fray. "Mimicry," Miss Marple murmured, pocketing the dispatch. "To invoke the curse, deflect blame." As midnight bells tolled from San Marco's distant tower, she lingered in shadow, watching the bridge. A cloaked figure emerged, tall, hesitant, pausing to scan the fog-shrouded canal before vanishing into an alley. Miss Marple's eyes, accustomed to St. Aldhelm's nocturnal prowlers, tracked the silhouette. Not Thorn's slouch, nor the Count's erect bearing, but familiar nonetheless. Gondolas rocked gently nearby, their hulls whispering against stone. One, untethered, drifted silently, poled by unseen hands. Sir Henry found her there, concern edging his features. "Miss Marple, it's perilous. Rossi has men posted." "Perilous, yes, but revealing," she replied softly. "The button pins Thorn. The lace veils a deeper game. Human nature dons masks here as in any parish hall. Curse or no, it's flesh and folly that kills." Retiring at last, she pondered the timeline. Hargrove's aperitif argument, the locked door's mystery, the dagger's vanishing act. From a waiting gondola, perhaps, the blow struck swift and silent, body consigned to the tide with evidentiary bait. Venice's moon, she reflected, illuminated not romance, but the stark contours of guilt. Chapter 6. The Web Tightens. The palazzo's corridors, once echoing with scholarly discourse and the clink of aperitif glasses, now resonated with the tramp of police boots and the murmur of guarded conversations. Dawn's pale light filtered through barred windows, revealing Inspector Giovanni Rossi's raid on Count Alessandro de Rossi's private study, a sanctum of leather-bound tomes and locked cabinets, its walls lined with ancestral portraits that seemed to glare in disapproval. The Count, roused unceremoniously, watched in stony silence as officers pried open drawers and tapped panels for hollows. "This outrage, Inspector!" he protested, his aristocratic calm fracturing. "My family's archives are sacred." Rossi, undeterred, directed Luca Moretti to the canal grate beneath the study's arched window, a rusted portal giving onto the Rio de Orefici. Flashlights pierced the gloom, illuminating faint rust-brown smears on the iron bars. Blood, diluted by tide, but unmistakable under luminol's glow. "Traces from the blade, perhaps," the inspector declared, snapping photographs. "Washed here post-murder. Your study overlooks the bridge, Count, convenient for a midnight disposal." The discovery linked the crime scene directly to the palazzo's heart, tightening the noose around its inhabitants. Confrontations escalated in the salon by mid-morning, the air thick with cigarette smoke and tension. Elias Thorne, summoned first, slumped into a chair, his usual bravado eroded. Cornered by Rossi's recounting of the gondolier's testimony, a nervous foreigner ferried across the canal at 11. He confessed to the argument but swore innocence of blood. "Reggie and I scrapped in the loggia, yes, over that cursed dagger. He waved forged receipts, threatened to ruin me with Grant's auctions. I shoved him. He stormed off toward the canal. I walked to clear my head, took a gondola back, didn't see him again till the scream." His alibi, pieced from reluctant witnesses, held water thinly. The boatman recalled a passenger muttering about debts and blades. Mrs. Lavinia Grant, her emerald silk replaced by sombre black, arrived with her maid bearing smelling salts. Questioned on the repaired cuff, she fluttered indignantly. "A tear from dinner, caught on a chair, darling. My seamstress fixed it at once." But the maid, under pressure, admitted secrecy. The repair occurred post-scream, thread matching the fragment's weave. Grant's secretary alibi faltered too. Witnesses from a nearby cafe placed her and Thorne in a shadowed alcove, arguing fiercely over Hargrove's demands. "Business pressures," she sighed, "not murder." A new figure emerged from the palazzo's fringes. Luca de Rossi, the Count's nephew, a lanky youth in his 30s with shadowed eyes and a perpetual scowl. Overlooked amid the luminaries, he had arrived unannounced days prior, nursing a grudge. "Hargrove swindled my late father," he spat when Rossi grilled him in the courtyard. "Sold fictitious, bankrupted the estate. Uncle hosted him to negotiate. Fool!" I watched from the shadows, saw Hargrove leave the study, dagger in hand perhaps, but I retired early, alone. His hands trembled. A search of his quarters yielded pawned de Rossi heirlooms, suggesting desperation. Motive aplenty, yet no direct tie to the canal. Miss Marple, invited by Sir Henry to observe the proceedings, gathered the suspects in the salon that afternoon, her mild presence disarming the frayed nerves. Seated by the window with her knitting, a now complex Aaron Cable, she spoke softly, as if recounting village lore. "Human nature is much the same in palazzos or cottages," she began, eyes twinkling behind her spectacles. "It seeks shadows for its deeds, but leaves traces. This button found by the Watergate, monogrammed E.T. She produced it from her bag, handed to Rossi earlier. "Snagged in haste, Mr. Thorne, during your walk?" Thorne paled, stammering denials, but the evidence pinned him near the scene. Clara Beaumont, trembling, beside her aunt's empty chair, broke down fully. "I forged a note, lured Uncle to the canal, hoping to confront his blackmailer. He suspected Grant and Thorne. I thought to protect him, make him see reason. Slipped it under his door. Meet at the bridge, urgency. But I stayed in my room, heard the splash. God forgive me." Tears streamed. Her naivety had supplied the perfect bait, unwitting pawn in a deadlier game. Miss Marple nodded sympathetically, her needles pausing. "Dear child, intentions pave hell's roads, but the lace, that was no accident." She outlined her deduction, voice steady. "The fragment, torn deliberately from Mrs. Grant's gown during a prior scuffle, was planted in Hargrove's hand to mimic a de Rossi historical crime, a 17th century assassination where a traitor's mistress left such a token. To invoke the curse, deflect to family vendettas. Clever, but lace betrays its owner, like the village seamstress's hem that trailed mud to the guilty door." Sir Henry marvelled as she sketched the timeline on a notepad. Aperitif at 10, Thorne's quarrel, Clara's note drawing Hargrove out at 11:15. The locked side door, unbolted briefly by an insider, murder committed, then refastened with a duplicate key, Thorne's, matching one found in his wallet. But the strike? From a waiting gondola, silent and concealed, the blade flashing under moonlight before the body was shoved into the current. "Like the miller's cat burglar," Miss Marple likened, who poled across the pond unseen, netting more than fish. Rossi, moustache twitching with reluctant admiration, cross-examined. The Count admitted providing the duplicate key to Hargrove for private viewing, unwittingly arming the plot. Luca's grudge placed him nearby, but alibis held for now. As fog rolled in anew, muffling the lagoon's cries, the web constricted. Confessions loomed. Venice's waters stirred, would yield the final catch. Chapter 7. The dagger's secret dawn broke over Venice with a reluctant pallor, the lagoon's waters churning under a flotilla of police launches, their engines growling like hounds on the scent. Inspector Giovanni Rossi, directing operations from the Palazzo Venier's Watergate, watched as divers plunged into the Rio de Orefici's murky depths, bubbles rising in frantic clusters. The night's revelations had crystallized suspicions, but proof remained elusive, until a shout echoed from the murk. "L'abbiamo trovato!" A frogman surfaced, clutching the Renaissance dagger, its emerald hilt dulled by silt, blade sheathed in weed. Hauled aboard, it matched the wound's fatal curve precisely, though wiped of overt blood. More startling, its secret compartment, pried open in the Count's study under forensic lamps, lay empty. Etched faintly inside, however, were coordinates, precise latitudes to a Swiss vault in Zurich, hinting at treasures beyond emeralds. Perhaps Dozier bonds or smuggled gold from the Republic's fall. Hargrove wasn't slain for the steal, Rossi proclaimed to Sir Henry and Miss Marple, gathered on the quay as gulls wheeled overhead. He cracked the secret, knew of the vault, tied to de Rossi wartime laundering, pressed the Count, threatened exposure unless the dagger sold dirt cheap. But the real prize? Mrs. Grant's scheme, using Thorne's forgeries to launder millions through auctions, the vault as repository. Hargrove discovered it all, demanded his cut or silence. The Count, summoned to the salon amid the clatter of recovered artifact, confirmed the etching's authenticity. Family law whispered of it, a hiding place for exiles' wealth. Hargrove, pried during his visit, sketched the marks. I refused sale. He vowed ruin. Desperation etched his features. Developers' bids loomed, the Palazzo's fate sealed without funds. I tipped him anonymously about Grant's web, hoping mutual destruction. But murder? Never. Miss Marple, her knitting idle for once, pieced the mosaic silently. The button, Clara's forged note, the lace's mimicry, all threads in a tapestry of greed, akin to St. Aldhelm's baker who hid poisoned flour in a rival's oven, undone by a stray crumb. By noon, Rossi orchestrated a dawn raid of sorts, not on vaults, but mines. He summoned all to the murder site itself, the narrow bridge over the Rio de Orefici, now cordoned and stark under a watery sun. Gondoliers idled a distance, their poles still. The palazzo loomed like a judge. Suspects assembled uneasily, Thorne fidgeting, Mrs. Grant imperious in widow's weeds, Clara pale, the Count and nephew Luca watchful. Sir Henry flanked Miss Marple, who stepped forward at Rossi's nod, her voice clear and unassuming. "It was the lace that betrayed you, Mrs. Grant," she announced to the stunned circle. Gasps rippled. The heiress's fan froze mid-flutter. Not chance, but rage. During the apparative quarrel, before Thorne's loggia row, Hargrove confronted you privately by the canal gate. He knew your laundering. Thorne's fakes sold high. Proceeds to the vault via the dagger's clue. You wore that gown, cuff trimmed in Vortici lace. In fury, he tore it free, vowing exposure. To silence him, you slashed with the pilfered dagger, snatched earlier from the study, key borrowed from the Count's ring during your tour. Mrs. Grant's composure cracked, eyes darting to Thorne. "Lies! That spinster witch!" Miss Marple continued mildly. Panic followed. You fled via the side door, unbolted with Thorne's duplicate, your lover's gift. He waited in a hired gondola, poled silently under the bridge. You passed the blade. He wiped it, stowed it in the hull. The body waited briefly, drifted free with the lace planted in hand. To ape the De Rossi scandal, blame the family curse. Thorne relocked the door from outside with string through the keyhole. A trick like the village lockpicker's ploy. Clara's note lured Hargrove out perfectly. You overheard, timed your strike." Rossi interjected, producing the gondola, seized at dawn, from a traghetto mooring. Traces of blood in its bilge, and a hidden panel matching the dagger's sheath. Thorn's button, the repaired cuff's thread, fibres identical. The maid confessed, seeing her mistress return drenched, dagger in cape. "From the cape," Miss Marple added, "that gondolier glimpsed. Yours, dramatic and dark." Thorn lunged forward, but officers restrained him. "She forced my hand. Hargrove had proof. Photos of fakes, vault keys. We argued. She struck first." Mrs. Grant cornered spat venom. "He bled our profits dry, deserved it. The vault's ours by right." Clara sobbed, her lure unwitting catalyst. The Count, cleared of blood but stained by secrets, bowed head. "My tip ignited it. Vengeance on smugglers, not kin." Luca, grudge intact, slipped away unaccused. Miss Marple sighed. "Like the baker's wife, who overplayed her alibi with a false witness, you left stitches undone. Greed weaves tight, but truth unravels all." Rossi clapped irons, launches bearing the pair to the Questura. The dagger, destined for museums, shed its curse in daylight. Chapter 8. Justice on the Lagoon. The arrest unfolded under the midday sun like a tableau from a Renaissance painting. Dramatic, inevitable, and laced with operatic despair. Motor launches converged on the Rialto Bridge, their sirens slicing through the throng of tourists who gawked from gondolas and vaporettos, cameras flashing like accusatory fireflies. Mrs. Lavinia Grant and Elias Thorne, wrists bound in polished steel, were marched from the Palazzo Venice under Inspector Giovanni Rossi's watchful eye. The heiress, her diamonds dulled by the harsh light, cursed in a torrent of English and fractured Italian, her carefully coiffed hair unravelling like her schemes. "You meddling fools! Venice will swallow your truths. My lawyers will bury you." Thorne, pale and muttering, cast venomous glances at his former paramour, their alliance shattered by self-preservation. "She wielded the blade, Inspector, not I. I only mopped the mess." Rossi, moustache triumphant, ignored the theatrics, directing his men with crisp efficiency. The gondola, impounded and trailed behind a police craft, yielded final damning evidence. Microscopic emerald flecks from the dagger's hilt embedded in its wood, and a sodden cape bearing traces of canal mud and Grant's perfume. Confessions tumbled forth in the Questura's stark interrogation rooms, Thorne bartering details of the forgery ring for leniency. Grant railing against Hargrove's betrayal until her voice cracked. The Swiss vault, raided by Interpol at Rossi's urgent wire, brimmed with laundered spoils, forged canvases, pilfered icons, and bonds tracing back to wartime de Rossi hoards. The Renaissance dagger, its curse exposed as mere etching and myth, was destined for the Doge's Palace Museum, a relic stripped of shadows. Count Alessandro de Rossi, cleared of the murder but ensnared in ancillary probes into family smuggling, faced the palazzo's fate with quiet dignity. Developers' bids evaporated amid scandal, yet, in a gesture of redemption, he gifted the blade to public stewardship, ensuring the Venier lineage endured through transparency rather than secrecy. "Honour demands it," he told Sir Henry, over espresso in the saloon, the room now echoing with emptiness. His nephew Luca, grudge unslaked but uninvolved in blood, departed for Milan, whispers of further reckonings trailing him. Young Clara Beaumont, her forged note deemed naive folly rather than malice, collapsed into Sir Henry's protective custody. "Uncle would forgive me," she whispered on the palazzo steps, tears carving paths through her powder, I sought only to save him from himself. Sir Henry, ever the gentleman, arranged her passage to England, where discreet therapy and family solicitors would mend her fractured world. Human error, Miss Marple, he confided later, not villainy, like the vicar's ward who meddled in St. Aldhelm's scandals. As the frenzy subsided, Venice resumed its eternal rhythm. Church bells pealing from the campanile, merchants haggling over Murano glass, the lagoon's tides erasing the night's stains. Inspector Rossi sought Miss Marple at the Palazzo's watergate, tipping his hat with unaccustomed warmth. "The English oracle," he dubbed her, a grin cracking his stern facade. "Your lace and buttons unravelled what my dredges could not. Scotland Yard should import you." She demurred with a gentle laugh, her shawl fluttering in the breeze. "Merely observation, Inspector. Villages teach one to see beyond masks." By evening, Miss Marple boarded the train from Santa Lucia station, the canals fading into a mosaic of light and reflection as the locomotive chugged toward the mainland. Sir Henry saw her off, pressing a volume of Venetian sonnets into her hands. "A token, dear lady. You've conquered the Serenissima's enigmas." She smiled, settling into her compartment with knitting resumed, a simple garter stitch to soothe the soul. "A beautiful city, Sir Henry, but too many masks and mirrors. Give me St. Aldhelm's any day. Its secrets whisper plainly in the hedgerows." The journey northward blurred into twilight, Italy's hills yielding to alpine passes, then the Channel's ferry. Back in Dorset, amid the cottage gardens and churchyard elms, Miss Marple unpacked her tapestry bag, the lace fragment's memory lingering like a half-forgotten stitch. She reflected over tea with the vicar. Evil lurked as readily in grand palazzos as in humble parlours, born of greed, jealousy, the timeless frailties of the heart. Undone, always, by the simplest threads, a dropped button, a torn cuff, the unvarnished truth that no gondola's shadow could outrun. In St. Aldhelm's quiet lanes, life resumed, the poacher's wife bartering eggs, the squire tending roses blind to his own thorns. Miss Marple knitted on, her needles clicking a rhythm of contentment. Venice had tested her, but human nature, eternal and unchanging, bowed to keen eyes and kinder instincts. The moonlit canals, for all their allure, paled against the clarity of an English dawn.